Music theory, timbre, otherwise known as tone color. Now, we touched in on timbre in a prior presentation, but want to continue on with it here because the concept of timbre has very practical, applicable implications to the actual playing of our instrument. It being tone color, and all tone color sounds important, and it is. It's the thing that allows us to distinguish one instrument from another instrument, even if they're playing the same note, the same pitch, at the same volume. Even if we're playing the same instrument, we can have variations in timbre, even if they're playing the same note, once again, at the same volume. And the instrument of the guitar, our primary instrument of focus, although the same concept applies to other instruments as well, the guitar has a wide range of different kind of variations because of the way the instrument is designed, because we're actually grabbing the strings with our finger, because we're actually plucking the guitar in some way, either with a pick or our fingernails or part of the flesh of our finger, all of which changes not necessarily the volume, not necessarily the note, but the color of it. So that's the thing we want to kind of dive into here. So definition first. Timbre is the quality or color of sound that makes it distinct from other sounds of the same pitch and volume. Now, as we get into the concept of timbre, it's going to sound a little like kind of ethereal. It's like you're getting a little wonky here in your definitions, in your terminology. Why does it sound like you're describing wine tasting or something like that? And obviously the reason is because we're trying to describe something that has a quality that you can't actually see, and the things that we usually define are with our visual capacities. We as human beings normally have vision as our primary thing to describe things. So when we're trying to describe sound or taste, you start sounding kind of weird, kind of wonky, and sometimes you get these weird terms and you can go off in random directions. However, we have to define it somehow, because definitions are important, because you have to kind of basically be able to communicate what you're getting across. So to somehow come up with some kind of vocabulary for things that aren't concrete, solid, visible becomes difficult but necessary. So it is what allows us to distinguish a violin from a flute or a human voice from the trumpet, even if they are playing the exact same note at the same loudness. So remember, the components that we have that we're typically thinking about is, one, the volume, how loud it is, and two, what's the pitch that we talked about in prior presentation. In our case, what note are we playing? That would be the simplest way to basically say it. What note are they playing? And then what's the volume? Well, you're eliminating this huge range of the color. Now, I want to kind of compare that just to get an idea with our visual components with painting, for example. All the painting, all the colors come from our three primary colors. So from a practical standpoint, you would do the math here and say, well, there can't be that many combinations of colors. There's only three colors. How many other colors can come from that? But obviously the palette of different colors is in essence infinite, right? Similarly with music, you have a similar kind of situation. You have 12 notes. You might say, well, that's more, and the octaves go up infinitely, so there's kind of more combinations, but possibly still manageable to think about all the different combinations of the notes. However, if you take into consideration the timbre, the variations within a particular note, even within the same volume, then you can see the combinations get to be basically infinite that come about. And this is going to be important for a couple different reasons. One is the way we approach the instrument. So notice that when we approach one particular instrument, such as the guitar, we can think about how can we make things a little bit different, even though I'm playing the same note. And obviously we can come up with creative ways to change the timbre, the way we're playing it, which is going to change the resonances around that one wavelength. We're not talking about if we drop our comparison that we saw about in prior presentations, we drop a pebble into the water, we get one big wave, and that's what we define the effect as. But we also get the other littler waves that happen. Those things will change depending on how we approach the playing of the guitar. So that's going to have very practical implications for the playing of one instrument. Obviously, how did we deal with this in the past? We made cool things by putting multiple instruments together that sound differently in, say, an orchestra or something like that. so that you can have all these different effects that have different colors that are now coming together. Now, obviously, in today's age, it's kind of hard not to think about like AI and whatnot when you're considering these concepts as well. Meaning, if they're going to replicate something like a guitar, then how would they do that? Well, if you have a solo guitar, they're going to have to layer different waves on each other as they would naturally be done if you were to drop a pebble into the water, right? It's going to have multiple waves. You can create just one instrument, one note with the distinct sound of a guitar by layering, instead of multiple different instruments, just the different wavelengths that would happen from that one string. But you can see that still gets quite complicated, right? Because what if you're trying to simulate the bending of a string, or attacking the string with a pick versus your finger versus your fingernail, right? All of those things are going to have a tremendous amount of variations, where you can imagine layering it on say music. You can layer your guitar on top of yourself to play with yourself, right? And you can also try to think about layering actual just tones to create one instrument, and then one instrument versus another instrument, which you would imagine is kind of the thing that's happening with the AI. But just realize the complexity of that is amazing that it's doing that, because it's very complex. It's amazing also, just like when they're making the pictures, it's like, that's amazing the amount of complexity that it's putting together with the different colors and shapes and whatnot. It's like an infinite amount of complexity that's coming out somehow. So anyways, timbre equals how a note sounds, not what note it is or how loud it is. So core characteristics that create timbre. So we got the overtone structure. We talked about this in a prior presentation. If we understand the concepts of the overtone structure, then that can give us a little bit better understanding about possibly how the formulas work that we talked about before, but also possibly about how different instruments might mesh together better, and as well as possibly how you might play with your own instrument and think a little bit more deeply about your attack of the instrument, how you're playing the instrument. So the unique pattern of harmonics, patterns that vibrate along with the fundamental pitch. The fundamental pitch, remember, if we drop the analogy of the rock into the pond, the big wavelength that comes out, which would be like when you pluck the string, the big wave that goes out towards our ear is going to be that fundamental pitch. So we got the ADSR, that stands for the shape of the sound's volume over time. We'll get into the definitions of each of these in a second, but it includes the attack, the decay, sustain, and release. So we'll talk more about that shortly. Formant regions, so fixed resonant frequencies that give each voice or instrument a distinct tone. So now when we're describing things, we can basically describe the region that's going to give the tone of an instrument or a voice. Obviously, when we talk about two different people, it's not necessarily just their volume and the pitch that distinguishes different voices. It's these different resonants that are coming out as well. So noise content, breath, rasp, bow noise, pick sounds all contribute to uniqueness. So when we're singing, the way that our breath is coming out is going to have a component. The bow noise, so clearly when you're looking at different instruments, that's why they're different in part if they're in an orchestra, because now you have all these different colors that you can basically put together that are having the different colors because of the way their instrument was created or how it's being attacked or approached by picking, by wind, by a bow, and so on and so forth. Vibrato and modulation. So subtle changes to the pitch or amplitude create a richer, more human sound. So this is something clearly that like a guitar is quite good at, because you could basically maneuver the string with your finger in different ways, and that can give it a tone possibly that might be more natural, noting that oftentimes what we're doing with the instruments is mirroring what we do with our vocal cords, right? The vocal cords are the things that are making our vocal sounds. That's the thing that we human beings kind of like and like to mirror in some way, right? With the sounds that we're creating basically musically, typically. articulation technique. So how the sound is initiated, is it bowed, is it plucked, is it struck or blown? So what kind of instruments are we basically talking about here? We're primarily going to be looking at the guitar when we get into our basically understanding of the music theory in more general terms. But obviously most of this stuff is going to apply to different instruments as well. And so you can get a broader context of it from that. Harmonic fingerprint, here's the overtones. We talked about this in a prior presentation, so I don't want to go into it in too much detail here. But when an instrument produces a pitch, it also produces the overtones. We have the analogy of dropping a rock in the pond. The primary fundamental, the big wave, that's what happens in the air when we pluck the string. And then you have the overtones, the smaller waves that have some characteristics to them. So these overtones are higher pitch frequencies that occur in whole number multiples of the fundamental. The strength and presence of each overtone vary by instrument. So that's the thing that's going to distinguish them. Again, we're going to mainly get into the musical concepts and apply them to the instrument that we know best, that being the guitar. But just to get some idea of how these kind of different colors work, and historically, how has this worked? What do we want to do? We want to have an orchestra that has all these different colors together and be able to kind of blend them together. So we have these different instruments. We've got the clarinet, strong, odd numbered harmonics, hollow, woody tone. So this is where it sounds like, are you describing a wine tasting thing, or right? Oh, it's a hollow, woody sound, right? Okay. And again, we have to come up with something to describe it because it is different. It's hard to describe it though. We have a flute. It's got a weak overtone, pure, breathy sound to it, okay? The violin, well, it has a rich in both low and high harmonics, warm and full. Doesn't that sound like a nice red wine or something like that? So they can get a little bit wonky, a little bit, when people start describing their wine, you're like, did you really get that from that? I don't know. I feel like, your terminology has gotten a little bit off, but we have to describe it somehow. So human voice. So emphasizes formants varied by vowel and pitch. Okay, so we have the ADSR. Remember, that's going to be the attack, decay, sustain, release. What is the attack? Time it takes to go from the silence to the peak amplitude. So if you're on a guitar and you pluck the guitar, there's going to be silence, and then it's going to go to some peak. If you were to hit that or show it on a tuner, then that peak might be a little bit higher than where it's going to sustain at, right? Depending on how the attack was. So then we have the example, a piano has fast, bowed instrument is more gradual. So then we have the decay, time from peak to sustain level. So if you pluck the string on the guitar, it might peak higher than the actual tone that it's going to sustain on if you were to show that on a tuner, for example. So example, precision, fast decay, and then percussion has a fast decay. And then we have the sustain, constant level during the note's hold. So if you pluck the string, it's going to peak, and then it's going to basically hold the sustain, which is the easiest place to basically tune it at if you're using an electronic tuner, right? Hopefully it's going to hold on there for a little bit of time. So you have the measure of how long it'll hold on the sustain. So the organ has a long sustain, for example, and then the release. That's the time it takes to return to silence after note is released. So after the note's released, how long does it go back to silence? Example, the guitar is medium, the cymbal is long. Timbre and music practice. Composers and orchestrators use timbre to create contrast and blend between instruments. Now, again, the classical idea of music theory, what are you going to do with timbre? Well, you can imagine that the old, when people were grasping these concepts, they're like, oh my goodness, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all the colors of the music, of the musical rainbow, and I'm going to put them into an orchestra with all these different instruments and allow them to attack it in all these different ways. And I have, and you can imagine, it's almost like the orchestras get bigger and bigger, and now you've got this huge thing that you can do. So that's one way that you can do it. Obviously today, you have different ways other than possibly simply different instruments, such as the guitar. You've got like the electricness of the guitar now. So not only can I change it by vibrato, attacking the pick differently, and so on and so forth, but now I can alter it in all kinds of ways with just one instrument, right? I can actually plug it in and use different amplifier effects and whatnot and so on. And then I can also put it in the computer and then vary it with the computer, and then I can layer it on top of itself. So now I don't need to be playing everything at the same time. I could use sophisticated recording tools to layer it. So you can see how, hopefully this is how the colors, your mindset would change. If I was back in the day before recordings and whatnot, and I was like, dude, I'm going to maximize my color template to paint with, then I would want a massive orchestra, right? That's the way you would do it. But these days you could still do that. That would still be cool to do. But these days you're saying, I have all these other techniques I can do, so I can actually layer and use different colors by using a layered effect. Either putting my own music on top of my own music, building the layers that way, and I can actually change the layers of the music. You can actually say, well, there's the, within software, right? So I can actually make a layered guitar sound from just electronic stuff that actually still sounds like a guitar, because I put the harmonic series that's for the guitar within it, and then layer that on other things, right? So you can see the way the concept of how you're going to apply the colors of music has changed to some degree with technology in any case. So establish mood, dark, bright, warm, highlight melody, or create background texture. So arrangers consider timbre to avoid clashes or muddy textures. So if you get really kind of wonky in it, you might start saying, well, look, the overtone that I have right here is in the same key. It matches this other thing that I'm playing, but the way the overtones are matching out, maybe there's still a clash, right, in the overtone from the other. So you can get a little bit more wonky on the technical side of things to see if anything is making sure everything is mixing up together. And again, technology these days would allow you to actually remove just electronically, some of those things if you wanted to do that way. So electronic music leverages timbre shaping through synths and filters. So timbre and perception. So timbre affects emotional response, bright, brassy, bold, and triumphant, versus soft, breathy, intimate, or sorrowful. So it also plays a role in voice recognition and instrument identification. So let's give a quick recap of the things that we have that we can play with, so that we have our practical playing and what things can we vary within it. Timbre versus other sound qualities. We've got the pitch. Is it high, low? That's going to give us the frequency. In essence, the notes that we're playing are clearly the first thing that comes to mind when you're playing an instrument, and you can vary the notes that you play. The loudness. Clearly, the loudness is going to have a big implication. Even if you're just playing the same note, but you play it louder or softer, possibly faster or slower in tempo. And then we've got the timbre, which is going to be the quality or color, the harmonic content envelop. And that is something like on the guitar, which again, you can multiple or play or vary with almost an infinite waves, right? So we'll talk more about that later, but you could do hammer-ons, you could do pull-offs, you can bend, you can slide, you can pluck with a pick, you can pluck with your fingernail, you can pluck with your finger without your fingernail, and then you can get into an amplifier, which adds an infinite amount of variation, and then you can not only plug it into an amplifier, but amplifier or not amplifier, and put it into a computer, and then change the timbre with the computer.